The invitation had come casually, almost offhand, from my friend. "Hey, come over tonight. We're just hanging out," he'd said, his tone easy, no pressure. I agreed, expecting a quiet evening of video games and laughter, nothing more. What I hadn't expected was her. The moment I walked in, she was there, standing in the living room, moving with that kind of effortless grace that made a space feel warmer just by her presence. She was my friend's mother, in her early 40s, but there was something about her today that drew my attention differently, something beyond the polite greetings and the faint smile she offered me. She came forward to shake my hand, and I noticed immediately how firm and steady her grip was. Her palm lingered just a fraction longer than necessary, and her eyes met mine with a gentle warmth that made me feel both welcome and slightly off balance. I caught the subtle floral scent she wore. It wasn't overpowering, just a soft note that seemed to wrap around the edges of the room, calming and familiar. I realized I was already paying more attention than I intended, noticing the way her hair fell naturally around her shoulders, the subtle shine of her eyes in the overhead light, the way her smile tugged at the corners of her lips in a way that suggested both humor and understanding. As my friend moved to the kitchen to fetch drinks, she gestured for me to sit on the couch, the space between us narrower than I expected. I found myself acutely aware of her presence, the quiet energy she carried, the small movements that made the room feel alive. When she sat down, her posture was relaxed, yet there was a natural elegance in the way she crossed her legs and angled her body slightly toward me. I felt an odd mix of curiosity and hesitation. She wasn't overtly flirtatious, yet her nearness was comforting, stirring a warmth that I couldn't quite place. I tried to focus on the conversation, small talk at first, school, work, the usual mundane details, but even those felt different. Her voice was calm, melodic, and slightly teasing, drawing me in more effectively than I expected. Every glance she gave lingered just long enough to create a subtle tension, a quiet sense of intimacy in the ordinary. I caught myself noticing little details, the way her fingers traced the edge of the couch cushion absent-mindedly, or how her gaze softened when she laughed at something my friend said. It was unsettling in a way I couldn't fully articulate, yet strangely compelling. By the time my friend returned with drinks, I realized I'd spent the last few minutes consciously aware of her presence in ways I hadn't prepared for. The air between us seemed charged, not with anything overt, but with the quiet possibility of something unspoken. I reminded myself to stay composed, to remember boundaries, yet a small part of me couldn't help but be intrigued, curious about this woman who seemed both so familiar and entirely unknowable at the same time. The evening had only just begun, but I already felt the slow pull of something far more intriguing than casual friendship. After my friend left to grab some snacks from the kitchen, the room felt smaller, quieter, and somehow charged. She moved slightly closer on the couch, her presence suddenly more noticeable, as if the space between us had shrunk without either of us saying a word. I tried to focus on the TV screen, pretending to be absorbed, but it was impossible. The soft sound of her laughter when she noticed my awkward attempt at a joke was more captivating than any movie scene. She leaned in slightly, her knee brushing mine in the most casual way, yet I felt a tiny spark from the contact, a gentle reminder that proximity can speak louder than words. Her hand, reaching for a snack on the coffee table, grazed my forearm. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, yet lingered just a second too long for me to ignore. It sent a strange warmth through me, a shiver that I quickly tried to mask with a sip of my drink. My thoughts raced. This is my friend's mom, I reminded myself, but my heart didn't seem to care. Her voice carried a soft, teasing tone, gentle but deliberate, as if she enjoyed the subtle tension without needing to acknowledge it. "You always sit so stiffly," she said lightly, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. I could feel the warmth of her gaze, steady and curious, like she was observing me in a way that made me both self-conscious and flattered. The air between us felt intimate, charged with a quiet electricity, though nothing had been said outright. I noticed more of her subtle gestures, how her fingers lightly brushed against the fabric of the couch, or the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while keeping her eyes on me. These small, almost unconscious movements made her feel approachable yet irresistibly captivating. My mind was caught in a loop of awareness. Each touch, each glance, each laugh pulling me closer emotionally even as my rational side cautioned restraint. For a moment, I dared to imagine the conversation continuing longer than it should have, the air around us thick with shared presence rather than words. Her body language, leaning slightly toward mine, created a quiet tension that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't flirtation in the overt sense. It was something deeper, subtler. The way she moved, the way she laughed, the brush of her hand against mine, all spoke of comfort, warmth, and an unspoken curiosity about each other. As the minutes passed, I felt an unusual blend of embarrassment and anticipation. I was acutely aware of every slight movement, every accidental touch, every nuance in her tone. It was fascinating how ordinary actions, a laugh, a gesture, a brush of skin, could feel loaded with meaning. I reminded myself of boundaries, of friendship, of propriety, but her presence made it difficult to stay strictly rational. There was an unspoken acknowledgement between us, a silent recognition of something delicate and complicated, yet entirely human. By the time my friend returned with the snacks, the subtle tension had become a quiet undercurrent. Nothing overt had happened, yet the evening already felt different. Her warmth, her closeness, her easy laughter had left a mark I couldn't shake. And as I handed him a drink, I caught her eyes again, steady, knowing, and gentle, and I realized that the pull I felt toward her was only beginning, slow and insistent, like the tide creeping quietly over the shore. That'd be why the time the initial awkwardness had passed, the atmosphere in the room felt softer, warmer. My friend had disappeared to the kitchen again, leaving just the two of us on the couch. The TV played quietly in the background, but it was more like white noise than a source of entertainment. Our attention naturally drifted to one another. Conversation flowed more easily now, moving from small talk to personal stories. She began sharing anecdotes about her past, some funny, some tinged with mild embarrassment. But the way she spoke made even ordinary tales feel intimate. Her laughter, light and melodic, punctuated each story, drawing me in. I noticed how her eyes sparkled when she smiled, how the soft lines around them seemed to carry warmth rather than age. There was something reassuring in her presence, a quiet confidence that made me feel understood even in moments of silence. As she recounted a particular mishap from years ago, she reached out instinctively, her hand brushing my forearm to emphasize a point. The touch was brief, casual enough to seem accidental, yet I felt it linger, a gentle warmth that traveled like a spark up my arm. It was impossible not to notice. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breath nearby, the soft weight of her presence next to mine, and a faint scent of her perfume that clung to the air. My body was acutely aware of hers, the angle of her legs, the way she shifted slightly toward me as she talked, the subtle tilt of her head when she laughed. Each gesture, each look seemed to create an unspoken connection that wasn't romantic in words, yet carried an undeniable intimacy. I found myself laughing more than usual, my nervousness melting under the warmth of her attention. Her eyes occasionally met mine, and for a brief moment, the world outside the living room vanished. I noticed how her hand rested near mine when she gestured the faintest brush of skin, a touch that felt deliberate only in its comfort, not in any overt suggestion. The gentle contact sent an unfamiliar flutter through me, a mix of excitement and confusion. It was intoxicating and grounding all at once, an odd combination that left me both hesitant and captivated. She leaned back slightly, running a hand through her hair, and I realized I was studying every movement. The way she spoke with sincerity and subtle humor drew me in, making me want to listen, to linger, to be present in the moment longer than I should. There was vulnerability in her storytelling, a softness beneath her confidence, that made her feel even more human, more approachable, more fascinating. I wanted to reassure her with words, with a gesture, but the boundary between friend and something more kept me cautious. By the time my friend returned, the quiet intimacy we had shared lingered like a faint hum in the room. I could still feel the warmth of her hand against my arm, a spark that hadn't fully faded, a reminder of the connection that was quietly growing between us. There was no rush, no explicit action, just a slow awareness, a mutual recognition that something subtle and meaningful had begun. And as we all settled back, I realized that the evening had shifted in ways I hadn't expected. Simple laughter and shared stories had become a bridge, connecting us in a way that felt delicate, exciting, and undeniably human. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm, with my friend engrossed in the video game on the TV and me sitting quietly on the couch beside his mother. The room felt familiar, yet the tension under the surface had subtly shifted. She adjusted her seating slightly, stretching her legs under the coffee table, and in the process, her arm brushed against mine. At first, it seemed accidental, a mere coincidence of proximity, but the moment lingered. The warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch, sent a subtle shiver through me. My mind registered the contact, and I became acutely aware of her closeness. Her body leaned in a little more than before, not dramatically, just enough that the space between us felt intimate. I noticed how her presence seemed to fill the corner of the couch, like gravity pulling me in without force. The brush of her arm along mine was gentle but deliberate in its effect, stirring feelings I hadn't expected when I first stepped through the door. My thoughts raced. This is my friend's mother, I reminded myself. Yet the warmth of the contact made it hard to focus on logic. She laughed softly at something my friend said on the TV, and her hand, almost unconsciously, rested a fraction of a second longer on mine as she shifted. That fleeting moment, brief and delicate, carried more unspoken weight than words ever could. I felt an unusual mix of surprise, excitement, and guilt, all swirling in a quiet storm beneath the calm surface. My heartbeat quickened, and I found myself studying her movements, the subtle tilt of her head, the way her fingers traced the fabric of the couch absent-mindedly, and the way her eyes occasionally flicked toward me before looking away. It wasn't just the physical contact, it was the quiet awareness of each other. Every glance, every gesture seemed amplified in significance. I noticed the soft rise and fall of her shoulders as she breathed, the warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the room's atmosphere. I couldn't help but feel drawn to her in ways I didn't fully understand, an invisible pull that seemed to bridge the gap between friendship and something more intimate. Internally, I struggled with boundaries. Social rules, friendship loyalty, and age differences reminded me to be cautious. Yet the undeniable tension lingered, unspoken but palpable. Her presence was a puzzle, comforting, magnetic, and slightly forbidden all at once. There was an honesty in her movements, a subtle acknowledgement of connection, even if unspoken. Each time her hand brushed mine, it was as if a question was being asked and answered without a single word exchanged. When my friend finally got up to refill his drink, I felt a fleeting pang of relief and a strange disappointment that our private closeness had momentarily paused. She shifted back gracefully into a neutral position, her hand falling gently to her lap, yet the spark lingered. Even as we returned to casual conversation, the air between us had changed irrevocably. That accidental, fleeting touch had opened a door, one neither of us had explicitly walked through, but both of us felt standing just beyond, waiting for the right moment to step. The living room felt quieter now, the soft hum of the TV fading into the background as my friend busied himself in the kitchen. For the first time, it was just her and me. The air seemed different in those moments alone, heavier, warmer, yet charged with something neither of us had fully acknowledged. We sank into the couch naturally, side by side, the subtle closeness more noticeable than before. The ordinary distance between two people had narrowed, creating a space that felt intimate without words, a space where the air itself seemed to hum with possibilities. Our conversation deepened. She spoke gently about small challenges she faced, long days at work, the quiet frustrations of balancing responsibilities, moments of doubt she seldom shared with others. I listened closely, drawn not only by the words, but by the soft cadence of her voice. Each sentence carried warmth and honesty, a vulnerability that was rare and magnetic. I found myself leaning slightly closer, caught between the desire to comfort her and the need to maintain composure. As she spoke, her hand brushed near mine on the armrest. It wasn't an intentional touch, but it lingered enough to make me aware of the soft warmth of her skin. My heart skipped a beat at the subtle contact. I could feel the gentle pulse of life in that small connection, the quiet assurance of her presence, and the strange comfort that came from proximity alone. Her gaze occasionally met mine, soft and steady, and I sensed an unspoken understanding passing between us. It wasn't flirtation. It was something quieter, deeper, the acknowledgement of shared humanity and unspoken curiosity. I noticed the little details about her in these moments. The slight tension in her shoulders as she recounted her day, the delicate way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered in the space between us. Every nuance felt amplified, as if the ordinary had transformed into something more poignant and alive. The brush of her hand near mine, the occasional tilt of her head, the softness in her eyes, it all combined into a subtle language of closeness that words could never fully capture. I felt a strange blend of anticipation and restraint. Part of me longed to reach out, to gently place my hand over hers, to confirm the unspoken bond forming between us. But another part of me hesitated, aware of boundaries, of social expectations, and of the age difference that made everything feel delicate and precarious. And yet, there was no discomfort, only the quiet thrill of recognition, the shared understanding that something meaningful was unfolding in these small, tender moments. By the time my friend returned to the living room, the energy between us had shifted. The brief intimacy we shared lingered like a soft echo, subtle but unmistakable. Even as she repositioned herself on the couch, the warmth and closeness remained in my awareness. That quiet interlude had strengthened a connection I couldn't ignore, planting a seed of something deeper, something that promised emotional intimacy and subtle longing. I realized that the simplest moments, silent, unassuming, unhurried, could carry more weight than any dramatic gesture. The evening had settled into a quiet rhythm, with the muted glow of the lamp casting a soft light across the room. My friend had stepped out briefly to make a call, leaving just the two of us alone once more. There was a calm stillness in the air, a gentle pause that made every detail around us feel sharper. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, the warmth radiating from her presence beside me. For the first time, I noticed the way her gaze held mine with subtle intensity, as if she were searching for something unspoken. We fell into a conversation that felt different from before, deeper, more honest. She spoke about things she rarely shared, small regrets, hopes for the future, moments of vulnerability tucked away behind years of experience. Her voice carried a softness I hadn't heard before, a melodic reassurance that invited me to be equally open. I felt a strange courage rise in me, the desire to respond with sincerity, to match the honesty she offered so naturally. At one point, her hand moved near mine, resting lightly on the armrest. I felt the warmth of her skin, a quiet invitation to connection. It lingered just long enough for me to notice, to feel the subtle charge that had been building between us since the beginning of the evening. I realized then that this was no longer casual proximity. There was a deliberate, if unspoken, acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. My heart thudded quietly in my chest, awareness sharpening every small gesture, every flicker of expression. Her eyes met mine, steady and soft, and for a moment, the world outside the living room seemed to vanish. In the gentle curve of her lips and the quiet tilt of her head. I sensed a confession without words, a permission to feel what I had been suppressing. I reached out almost instinctively, brushing my hand against hers, not boldly, not insistently, just a tentative acknowledgement of shared emotion. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered against mine, a subtle squeeze, a quiet affirmation that what we felt was mutual. It was a moment charged with unspoken understanding. The silence between us was comfortable, intimate even, as though the hours we had spent in small gestures, accidental touches, and shared stories had led naturally to this point. I felt an almost dizzying mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that my feelings were not entirely one-sided, and anticipation of the delicate journey ahead. The age difference, the social boundaries, and the quiet constraints of circumstance all hovered in my mind. Yet in this moment, none of it seemed to matter. By the time my friend returned, we had shifted subtly back into casual conversation, but the air between us had changed irrevocably. A small touch here, a lingering glance there, carried a depth of meaning we both understood. The room felt warmer, more charged, and undeniably closer. That evening, in the quiet honesty of words and the gentleness of touch, we had crossed a threshold, one that didn't require bold declarations, only recognition. And in that recognition, I felt the slow, steady pull of connection that had been building from the first accidental touch, growing now into something real, fragile, and entirely ours by the time my friend returned to the living room. The quiet intimacy that had quietly blossomed between us did not vanish. It simply shifted into something softer, more composed. The subtle touches and lingering glances that had charged the air earlier were now replaced by a gentle awareness, a shared understanding that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Sitting across from me, she maintained a natural grace, her presence calm, but undeniably close. There was warmth in her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection we had been building throughout the evening, and I realized that something had changed between us permanently, in ways I could feel but not fully define. Conversation resumed, casual on the surface, yet beneath it ran an undercurrent of subtle recognition. Every time our hands brushed, when reaching for a snack or when adjusting a cushion, the moment carried more weight than simple coincidence. I noticed her smiles linger slightly longer. The tilt of her head when she laughed was more intentional, and the soft warmth radiating from her made ordinary movements feel extraordinary. It was as if we had discovered a language of closeness built on gestures, glances, and the quiet rhythm of shared presence. I caught myself watching her subtly, noticing the lines of her expression that hinted at her thoughts, the relaxed curve of her shoulders, and the ease with which she moved through the room. Each small detail spoke to a depth of character that drew me in further, not just physically, but emotionally. In return, I think she noticed me in the same way, the way I fidgeted slightly when uncertain, the way I laughed too loud at small jokes, the way my eyes betrayed curiosity and attentiveness. The awareness we held of each other was gentle but electric, a dance of proximity that neither of us had consciously initiated, but both of us understood perfectly. At one point, she reached out briefly, just a touch on the shoulder, as if to steady herself while standing, and I felt that familiar warmth, the subtle reassurance of closeness. It was fleeting, yet meaningful, a quiet affirmation that our unspoken bond was recognized and respected. I smiled at her, and she returned it, a soft, knowing expression that needed no words. In that glance, we shared something intimate and safe, an acknowledgement of desire tempered with respect, and the knowledge that we could explore this connection without haste or impropriety. As the evening wound down, the feeling of comfort and intimacy remained, settling around us like a gentle cloak. My friend, unaware of the subtle exchange happening beside him, chatted casually about plans and trivialities, giving us the space to simply exist near each other. I felt a deep satisfaction in the way things had unfolded. No dramatic confessions, no impulsive gestures, just a gradual, respectful building of closeness that felt entirely natural. When it was finally time to leave, I stood at the door with her, exchanging polite farewells. Her hand brushed mine briefly in parting, a soft, lingering touch, and I felt a rush of warmth, a promise of connection that extended beyond the evening. I stepped out into the night with my heart quietly full, aware that the bond we had formed would grow slowly, naturally, and meaningfully. The story of the evening was complete, not with a dramatic climax, but with a gentle, enduring resonance that left both of us changed in subtle, unforgettable ways.